Wow, talk about a price adjustment. This house behind me literally sold in January for $1,250,000. And as you can see, it looks like a pretty nice house. And here's the thing, they started off asking about $2.5 million for this house back in August of 2022, ended up selling it for $1,250,000. The new owner is obviously a flipper because they literally relisted it for sale just 2 months later for basically $1.9 million. More shenanigans, more games going on with the housing market here still. And let's see if they're gonna be the ones holding the bag with this. I don't know how they were able to get this house for 1.25 and think they're gonna sell it for 1.9 million literally 2 months later, especially when the previous owner could not sell it for anywhere near that. So good luck with that one, guys. I am back in Miami Shores today. Literally one of my favorite neighborhoods to walk through. I just love all these old trees here, and that's probably been here for 200-300 years, and provides a ton of shade being out here on these hot summer days. We just got a ton of rain here, so hopefully I'll get lucky and we won't get any more. Here's something crazy that you probably didn't know. According to Redfin, pretty much throughout the country right now, no matter where you're at, it's 25% more expensive to buy than it is to rent a home. And we already know that mortgage applications are hitting record lows. People are not interested in buying. And it might seem like the housing market's still on fire because depending on where you live, you might still see multiple offer situations. You might still see bidding wars, people lining up at open houses like there's no tomorrow. But the main reason that you're seeing that, and it's giving off the perception that things are still on fire, is because of low inventory, because everybody's fighting over the same low inventory still. But believe it or not, there's actually just a handful of cities in the United States right now where it actually still makes more sense to buy than it does to rent because it actually costs less money. If you are in Detroit, Philadelphia, Cleveland, or Houston, these are basically the 4 cities named by Redfin that are cheaper to actually buy a home still than it is to rent. In Detroit, it's 24% cheaper to buy. Philadelphia, you get about a 7% discount off of buying over there. Cleveland, Ohio is 4% cheaper. And Houston, Texas is basically neck and neck. It's 1% cheaper to buy than it is to rent over there. And one of the main reasons that Redfin is saying that these areas are still cheaper to buy than to rent is because these cities did not see the huge boom in prices that a lot of the rest of the country saw during this massive run-up in the housing market. But here's the good news in these places that haven't seen these huge run-ups in the housing market where it's still more affordable to buy than the rent, is you're going to be much safer from any sort of housing crash in these locations because you didn't see the big boom, so you're not going to see the big bust either. And I would say that's a blessing right now because other places are not going to be as lucky, guys. Even here where I'm walking in Miami, you saw at the beginning of this video all the games that are going on still. People just need to understand that in general, the more crazy of a boom any particular housing market got during this run-up, then the more likely they are to see big crashes when things really start coming down. And you don't have to look any further than places like San Francisco, Austin, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, Boise, Idaho. Okay, these places are already seeing double-digit losses within the last 7 to 8 months. So at this point, I'm just curious to know what the incentive would be for people to even buy right now when the gap between buying and renting is so large right now. On average, 25%. That's notably more expensive, and that's just an average. That can obviously vary widely depending on your area that you're looking at. And I mean, what is the incentive to jump in and pay that much more to own your place? I mean, in the past, there were many years where it was actually cheaper to buy than rent almost everywhere. And that was just like a no-brainer. If you could afford to buy, then yeah, go ahead, jump in and do it. But right now, to me, I just don't get it. Now this house was sort of an attempted flip. They bought it back in 2022 for $1.4 million, then turned around, listed it for sale for $1,590,000. Never actually sold it, but in fact they rented it a few days ago for $5,500 a month. And let's take a look at the property tax bill. Right now their bill is $8,175 a year, but that is with a homestead exemption. Now that the house is rented, they won't have that homestead exemption anymore, and I'd be willing to bet their property tax bill is probably going to go up around $11,000, $12,000 a year, making owning this home a whole lot more expensive. Like for example, if I were to move to a new area right now, and I was looking at the cost to rent versus buy, and it was actually 25% cheaper to rent than to buy, I would definitely be renting right now just to see what happens over the next couple of years, because rents have essentially stopped going up basically everywhere because there has been way more supply on the rental market come online so far this year than we have seen with the for sale market, and that is helping ease prices for rent. And the other thing that people need to understand is there is a ceiling on how much a landlord can charge tenants for rent, because if they can't afford to pay, no one's going to rent the unit. You see all the time, all these places that I show you guys here in Miami, where places sit empty for, 6 months to a year, and nobody lives there, okay? Because they're asking too much money in rent, and no one in their right mind will pay those prices or can afford to pay those prices. And if you can't afford it, you'll probably just buy instead, because it doesn't make sense to spend $10,000, $20,000 a month on rent. Nobody in their right mind would probably do that. So there is a limit on how much people can charge to rent any given property, and if you're beyond that limit, well, that's it. You're not gonna get it rented. But when it comes to home ownership, obviously people have to qualify for the home, and whenever they get into it, as the expenses continue to rise, they pretty much have to find a way to pony up the dough. Otherwise, they'll lose their home in foreclosure or be forced to sell it even though they don't want to. So there's a lot more pressure on homeowners to keep up with the rising costs, and why anybody would jump into that voluntarily right now is beyond me. I just don't get it, especially when we can see prices are posting year-over-year losses now pretty much everywhere, and that trend is very likely to continue for the next few years, guys. So if you're renting right now and you're saving money, that's a great position to be in. Never feel bad about that, or let someone else make you feel bad about it, saying that you're wasting money or whatever, because it's not going to be a waste of money if you're able to get a house at 20 to 30% off over the next 3 years, let's say. And we've already covered before that there's a certain set of people that just never want to own a home because they like the flexibility of renting, they like to move a lot, or they travel a lot. There's different reasons why people will choose to rent instead of own something, and that's a lifestyle choice. Nothing wrong with that either. If that's what you choose, that's what you choose. Now here's something alarming. The amount of households that are living paycheck to paycheck right now, especially six-figure households, is continuing to rise. We talked about this a few months back, but the latest numbers of this are in. LendingTree just did a brand new survey as of April 2023, and they found that 61% of U.S. households said that they're feeling stretched too thin with their monthly budgets right now. And on top of that, 49% of these people saying that they feel stretched too thin actually earn 6 figures or more. So almost half, all right? And this is a pretty notable jump from a year ago when they did this same survey, because 1 year ago, 42% of six-figure income earners said that they're living paycheck to paycheck. Well, now it's basically half, guys. Half the people earning 6 figures are living paycheck to paycheck. But the problem is it greatly depends on where you live as well, because there was another study done by Smart Asset, and they figured out that if you live in New York City and you make $100,000 a year, after adjusting for the cost of living and taxes, well, now you're down to about $35,000 after it's all said and done, versus if you made that same $100,000 in Memphis, Tennessee, then after taxes and expenses, you'd still be left with $86,400. So that is a huge difference in how much money you're left over with depending on where you live. That can take a huge toll on if you're living paycheck to paycheck or not. And also, in general, if you live in a city rather than in a rural area, 69% of people surveyed that live in cities say that they're paycheck to paycheck, guys. That's absurd. We're talking basically 70% of people. And when you contrast that to people who live in rural areas, only 25% of people in rural areas say that they're paycheck to paycheck. So the gap there is incredible. Obviously, it's far more expensive to live in a city. There's probably way more opportunities to spend money that you don't have, and probably the only upside to living in the city, if you lose your job or something happens, then you're much more likely to be able to get a new job very quickly because you're surrounded by businesses and opportunities that may need to hire you. Versus if you're in a rural area and you're commuting to a job, it's going to be much more difficult to find a new job close to home, so to speak. But this kind of brings me right into my next story. And when I saw this, I really resonated with this as a millennial because it was a story out of Fortune talking about how millennials who are earning six-figure salaries are feeling like they're barely getting by. And they're not necessarily paycheck to paycheck, but they've achieved their income goals and their dreams, but somehow it still feels like it's not enough. And I can relate to this because my goal always was, when I started off in business for myself, was I want to build up to the point where I'm making a six-figure salary. I want to make 100 grand a year, I even have it on my vision board. And it's been there for years. Here's some of the situations that some of these people are facing. You have this one couple that live in upstate New York, and their combined salary is $166,000 per year. They're putting a lot of their money towards savings right now because for the longest time they didn't even make enough money to save anything towards retirement. So a big chunk of their budget is going towards saving for the future. And after doing that, there's not a whole lot left over after paying their mortgage and for food. And they also have student loan payments. And guess what? Right now they're paying $400 a month, but when the payments resume, it's probably going to be double, up to $800 a month. That's how much they're actually going to be paying, which is a pretty big difference. And I actually feel bad for these people because it sounds like they're doing everything right in life. They're not overspending on anything. They're just trying to save for a house and make sure they have a good future ahead of them, really, is what they're trying to do. But it just doesn't seem like it's enough. And it's to the point where it's causing them financial anxiety and wondering if they're ever going to be able to afford to have children, because if you're already feeling like it's hard now and it's hard to get by at the moment, how's it going to feel when you have a kid or two in the picture? Kids are expensive. On average, in case you didn't know, it costs roughly $300,000 to raise a child from birth to adulthood. So $300,000 per kid is not cheap. And that's on today's numbers. We're not talking about what the inflation on that might be over the next several years. And when you hear stuff like this, guys, it's no wonder that the birth rate is going down in our country, because even people that would in the past be considered financially well off, making $166,000 a year, are concerned about having kids, wondering if they're going to be able to afford it and maintain any sort of life for themselves, is pretty bleak. It's a pretty bleak outlook for a couple reasons. Number one, because a lot of households don't even bring in that much money and they're doing all of this on less. This is a common concern among many people in that age group, including myself, guys. Like, if money were no object and I didn't have to worry about how much it's going to cost to raise a kid and paying for childcare and all these things that cost a ton of money, then I would be way more open or likely to have a kid. But because everything is so upside down and the world is so uncertain, it makes you pretty hesitant to do anything like that, especially when you worked your whole life to just build up to a point where you feel comfortable. Putting anything in the way of that or threatening that doesn't feel good. And that's what having a kid feels like for a lot of people. And there's also another aspect to this, because they interviewed another guy from Phoenix, Arizona, and he's raking in $108,000 a year as an insurance adjuster. He was talking about how his goal was also always to make it to that six-figure salary mark, and now that he finally made it there, and he has friends that work in tech or other fields that make double or triple what he does, it never seems like it's enough. And this guy is also claiming that, you know, he doesn't spend a lot of money, you know, he's pretty frugal in his lifestyle, but things cost a lot, guys, and Phoenix is an expensive city to live in as well. And it's amazing how quickly that $100,000 a year can disappear into just paying for life's essentials and maybe a few wants here and there. And some people can definitely run into this problem where it seems like it's never enough, right? If you make it to the 100 and now you want 200, and then you get to 200 and now you want 300, like there does come a point where the extra money is probably not going to satisfy you or make your life any better. You'll just find a way to spend that extra money. The chances of your levels of happiness going up from that are probably not very high. But I just thought this was an interesting thing to share because we're living in such a crazy world where literally $100,000 salary a year or more in many cases is feeling like it's not enough for people to actually get by on. And that's a problem, guys. People need to feel secure with their incomes, their jobs, their housing situation. And when it's getting to the point where making well above the average is not enough anymore, then you know we could be in trouble. Now, one last thing is here in Florida, it seems like the housing market will never fall down. Or at least it can seem that way because prices haven't really been going down here like they have been in some of the areas we talked about earlier. But it's also not really going up that much anymore either. In fact, the median home price in Florida is pretty much flat from where it was a year ago. A year ago was $405,000 median home price here in Florida. Today it's $410,000. And Florida got hit really hard with the last housing crash back in 2008. Some areas saw home prices fall as much as 50%, like right here in Miami, where I'm walking through. And there's a lot of speculation on what's going to happen this time around. I've given my opinion on this several times because as a local on the ground here, always walking these neighborhoods, seeing what's happening with prices and inventory, it gives me a little more insight on what I think is going to happen. Trying to get back to the car too before it starts raining again. The sky looks pretty dark. But here's what's going on here. Literally since 2020, we've had over 1 million people move to Florida, and the economy here in Florida is changing. It's not what it was back in 2008. We have a ton of remote workers here that we never had in 2008. Remote work was hardly a thing back then. We have a bunch of businesses moving their headquarters down here. You have hedge fund Citadel, they moved their headquarters here. Windstar Cruises moved down here. Ark Invest, they moved their headquarters down to St. Petersburg. We also have a big healthcare firm, Innova Care Health, who came down from New York and now they're headquartered in Orlando. And this is also something that we really didn't see last time around. But let's look at the data. We'll use the ReVenture app and SunStats to take a look at where things are at right now. So you can see that home prices in general are still going up. And with the SunStats version, you can see that home prices actually peaked during last summer like they did in many other areas, started going down, and now they're kind of trending back up a little bit again throughout the entire state. Here's the next thing you really have to look at. If we look at the amount of price cuts here in Florida, it is hovering pretty close to pre-pandemic levels, okay? 22.3% of listings have a price cut right now, and the average before the pandemic was in the 26 to 25% range. So we're almost there. There's a lot of listings that have price cuts at the moment. And when we look at the inventory, it is creeping back up. It is not where it was pre-pandemic. We still need the inventory to roughly double here in Florida for it to be where it was pre-pandemic, but it's also nowhere near as low as it was during the hot housing market buying spree. So the way things sit right now, I think Florida is not going to see any more major appreciation. That is probably over with for the most part, except in maybe a few select special areas that just don't make any sense. But in general, I think home prices here in Florida are going to stay flat for a while, and depending on how bad this recession gets, how much the stock market goes down, and how much forced selling goes on, forcing people especially to sell second homes, that's really going to determine the fate of Florida's future right now when it comes to how much things are going to go down. Because Florida is a highly speculative and investor-driven market. We have a ton of people here that buy homes with cash because they're looking for a place to park the money. You have a ton of people that buy second homes here that have the luxury of doing so. But when the economy turns sour, those people are not going to be as fortunate and may be forced to sell some of these properties that otherwise they're happy to hold on to at the moment. So all we need is inventory to double here in Florida and really throughout the rest of the US housing market, and I think we could easily see prices go down by 20 to 30% here, like I've been predicting. But it's all going to be hinging on, are we going to get that inventory? And I think it all lies in the hands of where the economy goes next. That will be the determining factor if we're going to get that inventory and Florida's going to see the big crash like it saw last time. It's probably not going to see 50%, guys, like we saw last time, but is 20 to 30% on the table? I think it absolutely is. We'll find out. We made it with no rain. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you click the bell notification down below. YouTube will alert you every time I post a new video. And if you don't want to wait, check out my next one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.